You're now listening to the Shift Training Show, where we're focused on positively impacting the quality of human interaction. Today, we have Joe LaRussa back for part 3. We're going to be learning more about how we can lead in the family unit. And this time, we are focused on early relationships where you may have a kid on the way, newborns, or maybe even toddlers, the first few years of the family unit. So Joe, welcome back to the show. Thank you so much. We appreciate you having you here today.
It's great to be back, Flip. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So I want to talk a little bit about, I want to kind of set the stage first. Usually as kids enter the picture, couples enter into like survival mode, which makes sense, right? I'd like to start discussing how leadership clarity between the adults can create emotional safety, consistency, and connection for everyone in the household. Do you have any thoughts on that before I start diving into these lovely questions?
Well, I think just relating back to my own story, this transition is a very natural thing. I want to assure everybody that's watching or listening that this is normal. This happens a lot. And you're not alone, and there are ways to deal with it. You're going from a situation where you have the opportunity to talk things out with your partner, and now it's kind of like you need to discuss it before. You need to just pull it ahead a little bit. That would be my first tip of the day here on our chat is accelerate and don't wait for the topic to present itself. When you can usually talk it out, you're going to have less time to do that.
I think that's perfect. I think that's congruent with what we said also in the last episode too, about not delaying communication. I'm not waiting until there's a fire to put out. We want to be proactive. So I think that's going to lead right into the first question, which is, what are some of the consequences or costs of misalignment between partners when parenting? So we would say, even if, let's say, maybe our child's not yet born or here in the world, we are still in the process of starting to figure out what that parenting is going to be, what it's going to look like, how are we going to go about that, right?
Yeah, for sure. The first thing is you're definitely going to feel pressure on your scarce resources, just like you would at work. When you want to grow the team, you have to invest time, you have to invest resources, not only to onboard them, but to train them. Now, it's a little bit different at home, but it's the same concept. Your time is going to get pressured. The average American household spends about 2 hours a day leading at home because, right, we have to sleep, we have to go to work, we have to take care of ourselves. We have to do personal care. We have to eat. So you have to be able to maximize those golden hours that you have as a leader in your household. And that's going to become even more important as your family grows because people need your attention, just like at work. They need your time and your attention.
Excellent. Yes. And I know that sometimes when we talked about this last time where you have a couple, you guys are the executives in the relationship, right? So sometimes there's stress or tension around these topics or subjects, right? It's important for the C-suite level, for the adults, for the parents to have those discussions and figure out how they're going to manage that stress, right?
Yeah, the biggest thing is I actually did a blog post about this, about how parenting is like office politics. You go to your boss or your supervisor, and you don't really get the answer that you want, so you kind of go to another person of influence and you kind of, plant the seed of the idea, and they're like, that's a great idea. Yeah, well, I really appreciate it if you talk to so-and-so about it because I don't really think they got it or they don't see it. It's the same thing at home, right? If they don't get the answer they want from mom, maybe they come and find dad, and maybe dad gives a different answer. So my kids, one of the early communication techniques that my wife and I agreed on was the first question to any ask that comes from the kids is, what did your mother say? Or what did your father say?
That's it.
And if they say, I haven't talked to them yet, then I know I'm giving the first answer. So now I need to make sure that my wife and I are already aligned, because whatever I tell the kids, I need to immediately communicate to her, I got asked this and I said that. And if we need to have a discussion before they come to you, let's do that.
Yes, absolutely. Because, kids will use that. They'll be like, well, my other boss said this is what we can do, right? So that's what we can do, right? And they will hold on to it, especially if
he didn't say no.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're slick. Kids are funny. Okay, so I think that's one of the reasons too, where it's like why the types of stressors need to be managed between the adults and not parent to child, right? When there's tension, there's challenges, it needs to be handled on those upper levels And I know that it's very common these days sometimes for, unfortunately, bringing the children into situations that they're not equipped for, or they might not be ready to be involved in, and maybe they should not be involved in, right? So I would say, what is a benefit that is for the household that the adults handle the things that the adults should handle?
Well, the adults, the leaders in any organization, they set the tone for the culture of the organization. So what's incumbent upon the parents is that they identify what matters most in the household in terms of values alignment, how we do things here, right? Which is a lot of what culture is, right? This is how we do it here. If your household values hard work, that's a value you can instill at a very young age. Hey, you took that out, you need to put it away. Can you come here and help me take out the trash, or age appropriate chores, these kinds of things, because you're cultivating a culture in your household that we value hard work and that everybody contributes. So there's opportunities for the adults, the leaders, to set the tone and set the culture of the organization, but that's why they need to spend the time to figure out what does matter the most and what are our common values that we want to make sure we're aligned on. And if there's some disconnects, that's okay. No team and no family gets it perfect, and there's just a chance for more communication in that situation. But what's incumbent upon the parents is that you identify, what your aligned values are, so that when you cultivate that culture with your children, you can do that in an age appropriate way.
Love that. Absolutely. Could not agree more. I think that's important, especially about establishing the culture. You're setting up the environment. And I would say, in an environment where you want children to be safe, I would say it's important to be mindful of how we're modeling emotional regulation and responsibility, right? What are your thoughts on that? How important is that to be able to model or demonstrate that? Because kids are always watching.
Well, it's twofold. I mean, and as your children get older, you have to be able to modify your approach situationally. So when my daughter was younger, she was having trouble with her homework, and we decided that we were going to help her because her grades were not so great and we needed to get her homework up to snuff. So we put a system in place to check her homework. Well, the problem is that there was a little bit of this going on with the finger pointing in both directions. Well, I thought you were going to check it. Well, no, I thought you were going to check it. And so the communication broke down. Well, that frustrated my daughter. Now, she's at like 9 years old at the time, right? So her frustration, she doesn't have that same emotional regulation like the adults have. So she's just having what we would call an outburst, but it results from frustration because her leadership said they were going to do something and didn't do it. So at 9 years old, you just have to absorb that kind of emotional regulation or lack thereof, because young children haven't developed those skills. Now that she's older, she is able to kind of take feedback a little bit more directly, but she's also able to express herself a little bit more in a healthy way, because we're able to show her, yes, you're right, this is a problem. Like, she was geared up for a fight, right? You said you were gonna do something and you didn't do it. And she wasn't expecting, yeah, you're right, we dropped the ball here. We're gonna get on the same page, we're gonna fix that. Because in the moment, I could have just used my parental authority and said, well, it's your fault, because if you were doing your homework right, I wouldn't have checked it in the first place. Right? It could have been that, right? And we've had those leaders who give us that kind of an answer, and that's not helping us get better. That's not helping our skills grow. It's not growing our respect for our leaders, for sure. So I don't think she was expecting us to emotionally regulate her by simply saying, yeah, you know what? You're right. We owned it. We took care of it. We changed the system. We actually got the result we wanted. And once she got her homework improved, we were checking it less. So there wasn't confusion anymore because we didn't need to check it. She was pulling, B's and A's.
Awesome. That is a great example. Thank you for sharing that. That is a great example of how to kind of introduce them to things like that. And sometimes you do have to be the one to still lead what that emotional regulation in that situation is going to look like. And I think also highlighting that accountability is extremely important, especially for leaders, because I have found, even myself in certain situations, where if I expect a leader to take on a certain level of responsibility and be willing to take accountability. And if I find that they cannot, parent or otherwise, like, it's very hard for me to trust them, feel safe, or respect them. It's hard for me to not become resentful. And I would say I want to introduce that to parents where it's like, if you've never worked with kids before or anything like that, I promise you, they will start to resent you if you show them that you are not willing to be accountable, because they look at you as you're the grown up, you're the big person. If you can't do it, then what the heck, you know? And they're really counting on you. So I would say as an adult, yes, you have the stress, you have the pressure as a parent, but the cost of not figuring out what you need to figure out or having those conversations, one of the costs might be that your children will resent you. And I can't imagine how painful that feels. I feel bad when some of my students get mad at me. So I can't imagine as a parent how painful that might be.
But that's what gives you the motivation to do the relationship repair, right? Sometimes we're going to fail. It's going to happen, right? You're not going to get it right 100% of the time. Just like at work, there are days where I come in and I'm short with people, or things aren't happening the way that I want, and I just, the frustration comes out. We need to take care of ourselves too and be able to watch what we're doing. We need to be able to step outside ourselves and see how we're handling it, because that's how other people see us. And for those of us that have trouble with that, we need other people to call us out and say, hey, this is going someplace that's not like you, like what's going on. So it's the same at home. And rather than having that resentment turn into something that is permanent, you have the opportunity to correct it and just, like you said, take the accountability. And for people that are looking for that opportunity, there are tools out there. There are people that can help you. There are communities that can help you. And, we are not meant to do life alone. And that's why we need our people around us to help us.
Absolutely. They say it takes a village, I absolutely agree.
100%.
And I want to clarify something about my language choice. So when I say resentment, I view resentment as, let's say, maybe something that has been festering or sitting. So in this case, disappointment. We might disappoint each other or let people down. But when we don't own up and say, hey, yeah, I know I played a role in that, that's where it kind of sits or simmers, and then maybe resentment will start to form. And I would think that's the long-term outcome of not being willing to face disappointment head on. It might feel uncomfortable. We might initially feel like we need to be defensive, right? But I would say, again, when you're a leader, you kind of got to be willing to face those things and deal with those things, especially as a parent. I would say it's tough. With that, I'd like to ask the next question, which is like, what are some leadership principles that could help reduce a little bit of the friction or chaos around communication and maybe reduce the space for resentment at home? We want to be able to face those things. So what are a couple of principles that might help us to be able to take things head on, maybe, and face them and do well with the conversations around them?
Yeah, I'll go back to what we said earlier about values alignment. I mean, there needs to be an intentional conversation between the leaders of the household to make sure that there's alignment. And sometimes you have to take a structured approach. I mean, there are unmet needs or things that people might not immediately verbalize that are important to them, but when they have an experience in the home and they feel the disconnect, then it manifests and it's kind of, it comes out in an emotional way, and it has to be kind of repaired a little bit. So one of the resources I like to use with people is, I have a family values worksheet. It's on my website, homegrownleadership.net, on the tools and resources page. It's one of the first things you can download. If you get that tool, it's got a grid with a bunch of single words that represent values. And if you don't see the words on the page that matter to you, there's blanks, you can write them in. But I always tell people, circle 5, 6, 7 of those, and then compare them with the other leader in your house, or other leaders in your house. Like if your kids are older, you could do this, everybody could do this, and you'll immediately see where there's potential for an alignment conversation. If you all didn't pick the same, at least, 60, 75% of those words, there's a space for a conversation right there. And that immediately diffuses the potential for resentment and the opportunities for disappointment, because now it's not about you or me or him or her. It's like, oh, we're just on different pages about these things and we just need to align. Because I might say, yeah, you know what? We really should be on the same page about the majority of these things, and then we can have things that matter personally to us, but the majority of them, there needs to be alignment, and that dramatically reduces the opportunity for disappointment and resentment.
Beautiful. Beautiful. We will make sure that link is available for everyone to check out that resource. That's going to be a blessing for sure. So how can we create like some simple structures that support connection in the home? Like if we think about what's something we can deploy and this might help us, what's one of those things?
The biggest tool or system I would put in place, the structure I would put in place relates to time. We said more at the top of the conversation, as your family grows, time becomes a more valuable resource, and you're doling out minutes and hours, and you have to do that in an intentional way. So time is one of those things where families have to be intentional about how they use it. They have to track it. They have to know how they're spending that resource. We track our money, right? We know where it's going. We have lots of tools to track our money, but time is a little bit more, I don't want to say amorphous, but it's a little bit less visible unless we make it visible.
Right.
So we have a family calendar in my household. We do the paper and pen method on the wall because before the kids get devices, it's a little bit easier to visualize it if it's on the wall. I've heard people say they use the whiteboard paint and paint their walls and draw a grid, and they have one big whiteboard in the most, active room in the house, and that's where the family calendar is. So that time management tool is the biggest. And if you don't know where your time is going, I have another resource, a time tracker. You and your partner track your time. Like I said, I hope you find that you validate my stat from earlier that you've got about 2 hours a day to lead your household because you're doing all these other things. And if you have more, good on you. Use it. You are rich in a resource that is very scarce. That's a great thing. But yeah, putting a structure around your time and allocating that time, that's an easy way to, again, avoid disappointment opportunities and resentment if you are on the same page about how you're going to spend your time. And I would add, fun is not what you have what's left over after you've done all the other things that are on your to-do list. You have to intentionally allocate time for fun, because that is what builds core memories. That's what builds shared experiences. And if you're not intentional about it, that is an opportunity for disappointment and an opportunity for resentment.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm really glad you added that. Okay, just to reiterate, you have to make time for fun, and you need to put it in there somewhere on purpose, everybody, on purpose. We're going to do it on purpose. It's okay. You need it. You deserve it. It belongs on there. So make some space for that. So if I'm going to start deploying that, I think you gave some good examples where it's like we should have a shared calendar, whether that's a paper calendar or painted on our wall, whatever it may be. How do you start to have maybe the conversation around that? Like how can a couple start to integrate or deploy that solution? Where should they start?
The very first thing is to structure the communication. When it's just the two of you, you can kind of have the conversations more casually. You have more opportunities to communicate. But as your responsibilities grow, when your family's growing, it becomes critical that the leadership team has a team meeting or has a dedicated time, again, intentionally allocating time for communication. Now, whether that's we always get together at the dinner table or we do it once a week on the weekend, you do this at work. You have dedicated one-on-one time with your people that report to you, and you have a team meeting every week. How inefficient would it be, Flip, if I ran around and talked to all my team members individually, and then after I talk to them, I have to run back around to them all again because I got new information from one person? That's why we put everybody in one room at one time,
right,
to have it out as a team. So it's the same at home. Structuring communication allows you to maximize the time that you have available to do what you're communicating about. If you're in this reactionary mode where it's like you're constantly giving the updates to each other and you never really get to the, well, what are we going to do about it? That's a lost opportunity. So structuring your communication, allocating time, another resource is a family meeting agenda, just having a way to get through topics, because not everything has to be dealt with in the moment. It's the same at work. Hey, I want to give you, my attention, but I got to get this done right now. Can you bring that up in the team meeting, or can we address it in our next one-on-one? Same thing at home. If it's not something that is emergent or urgent, can we park it until we get together and talk at dinner tonight or at our normal family meeting time?
Right. And I think that's the importance of having a regular family meeting time. I'm such a strong believer in that. And I feel like it's a big loss today where so many people don't. I feel like the value is just not understood because it's quietly social normed, eroded away. But the ability to have that consistency, to know that this is the ritual, this is part of how we maintain our culture, this is part of how we maintain our connection, this is how we make sure our communication is good. Like, it's as simple as saying, on these days, this is when we get together, and that's just what we do. I feel like it's so important. So I'm really glad that you brought that up. I feel like that's essential.
Yep, it's a leadership imperative. And again, the leadership sets the tone for the culture. And it doesn't mean that it's an obligation. If nobody has anything to discuss, you can just enjoy your dinner, or you can just enjoy your weekend. You can cancel a meeting that doesn't have a purpose.
Right.
It's totally fine. And it's not written in stone. It's written on a piece of paper. We can cancel it, change it, move it. We have options.
Or repurpose the meeting to be like, all right, we're going to do something fun. We're going to eat a little bit differently today, or do something else that we wouldn't normally do. Let's make an experience of this abnormality, right?
Exactly. Let's take advantage of an opportunity to get some time back and spend it together and do something else. Absolutely.
Awesome. So I think one of my closing questions is going to be, I have some friends that I know have newborns or they have babies on the way, and they will be needing this kind of information. They will need this kind of help. They will need to understand these things, I think, to be successful. And fortunately, a lot of them, I think they are pretty good communicators, and I think they make great teams. I would say for people who are entering into this, or maybe they have a toddler, early in the game, their kids are not 9 or 10 yet, but I would say for those who are early in the game, would you recommend starting their communication practices and leadership practices sooner versus later? Or should they wait till they feel like they're out of the chaos, and maybe the kid's like 6 or 7 and, I feel like, what do you think, Joe? You're the expert. I'm asking you.
Well, I wouldn't say I'm the expert. I might have a lot of experience, but I'm no expert. The way I would characterize it is, your life is never going to be less complicated than it is today. So if you're going to do something, do it now. If you wait, it's not going to be easier. So you can have one of two conversations with yourself. We could have had that done by now, or boy, I'm glad we got that done. And you get to choose which of those two conversations you get to have with your future self. So today's the day. There's a way to do in an age-appropriate way. There's a way to involve your children. The leadership imperative is deciding what that's going to be and how you're going to do it. And the good thing is, if a system's not working or something ceases to function, you can change it. You can do something different. You can stop doing it. There were I would say 3 or 4 iterations of family meeting before we finally hit the one that worked. It wasn't just as simple as, this is what we're going to do. It took a couple of tries to keep the team engaged. And now that the kids are older, it's evolved again, because what worked when they were 6, 7, 8, 9 isn't working now that they're almost 15 and 19. Right? So it's a different dynamic. They have stronger opinions. They have their own thoughts about how our time, money, resources are spent, but they're respectful about it because they realize that their contribution to those resource pools is maybe not as high as ours.
Right. I think that's good. And I appreciate you highlighting some of those differences, because I was going to ask what's it like when they're starting to become teenagers or teenagers. And I'm glad you explained some of those differences. So, my friends who might be listening, and other listeners as well, the rest of our audience, will have an idea of what types of things they might be ready to expect as they transition. I feel like there's always different warnings from different parents, but I think one of the things that is probably less understood is, if you start implementing the leadership stuff as time goes, what are those types of changes? Like once you have a good system, how do you update or change the good system to continue to be fruitful for your family going forward in the future? And I think you just explained some of those differences that could be very helpful to them. So thank you for that.
Oh, no problem. And the biggest thing I would add is don't underestimate the ability of a person who hasn't been told they can't do something yet, right? Children don't know that they can't do something. They haven't been told that. Never underestimate their ability to rise to your expectations. And that's how you evolve your systems. You raise the expectation level and then they meet the expectation. So then you raise the expectation again. It's the same thing at work. When we get high performers, we raise the bar and then they rise to the expectation and then we raise the bar again. So I would say no matter what life stage you're at, no matter what age your kids are at, don't underestimate their ability, because I think you'd surprise yourself and I think you'd surprise your kids about what they're capable of even at a young age.
Awesome. Absolutely. I think that is a fantastic gem. Just to remind everybody, Joe, where can people find you and how can they work with you?
Yeah, you can find me at homegrownleadership.net. Right on my website, you'll see information about me. You'll see a tools and resources page that has a bunch of free resources, tools that you can use right away. There's also an opportunity to book a call. If you want to do a more in-depth discussion, you fill out some of the tools and now you need to figure out what does it mean. You know, it would be an honor and a privilege to help any of your listeners that take advantage of those tools and want to take a next step.
Awesome. We will make sure those links are available in the show notes and description so everyone can reach out to you, book a call ideally, and go from there. Everybody, we just want to say thank you so much, Joe, for your time and for this discussion around leadership in the household. Again, Joe LaRussa with Homegrown Leadership. Cannot thank you enough. Thank you so much, my friend. I appreciate you.
It's my privilege, Flip. Thanks for having me on, and see you next time.
All right. Take care, everybody.